question is iOS and is iPadOS Pro ready?
What's new in filmmaking technology this week? News, reviews, education, insights, opinions, and ideas from the CineD newsroom with Nino Leitner and Johnnie Bahiri. This is Focus Check, the weekly Cinetech podcast.
Hi guys, welcome to episode 19 of CineD Focus Check. Last week you had Johnnie alone, and this week you have me alone. Now it's the summer, like everybody's busy. I'm busy with a newborn at home. At least I find the time to record a little podcast here. Johnnie already traveled to Japan, and he's going to be on our CineD mission over the summer as usual in Japan. So we will do this podcast again together remotely. But right now, like everybody's getting settled. Hopefully next week or the week after that, we'll manage to be both on the podcast again. Today you will have make yourself comfortable with me alone. I hope that's fine. And there's a couple of things we want to touch on. Now, let's dive right in. Well, last week, Johnnie already mentioned my Final Cut Pro for iPad 2 review. I just want to add a few more thoughts on what he said. So I spent a couple weeks testing this iPad M4 Pro, iPad Pro M4 with the M4 chip, and I focused particularly on Final Cut for iPad Pro it's called Final Cut Pro for iPad 2, which is very confusing because it sounds like it's Final Cut Pro for the iPad 2, which is a very old iPad, but they should have called it Final Cut Pro 2 for the iPad. Anyway, long story short, so I basically tested the software. And as part of that, of course, I also tried to test the iPad itself. Now, I'm going to make another video on this where I share my full thoughts on the iPad and using it as a professional device and what I think about that. And I just want to share a few thoughts here. Now, first of all, let's get started with the actual Final Cut Pro for iPad 2. Now, as I mentioned in my review, it's quite innovative that Apple actually enables you to connect iPhones directly to your iPad wirelessly without any additional hardware and give you the ability to simply live stream from them. Now, it's really nice. I think this is definitely targeted at content creators because I can't see, like professionals only shooting on iPhones, of course. I wish there was a way to use normal cameras and connect them to iPhones and Final Cut Camera, the free app that Apple released as part of this release, and simply connect a professional camera via USB-C to the iPhones and then stream from the iPhone to the iPad, because then you would really have a use case for multicam setups in a more professional environment too. Now, we're talking about version 1.0 of Final Cut Camera and, the second version of Final Cut Pro for iPad 2. So basically, this might come in the future. I'm just saying this is something that would immediately lift it to a whole different level because it works really, really well. The latency is very low. You have a lot of advantages doing it like this. You don't have to take care of timecode syncing. You don't need to use a Tentacle or a Lockit or any timecode sync box like you do with professional cameras. It just works, and that's very nice. And just imagine having that ability, because that would actually be a reason to keep old iPhones. Literally, if you were able to use an old iPhone with your camera and kind of leverage it as a wireless streaming device, and then do live multicam on the iPad, that would be amazing. Now, my biggest caveat of the whole software and the live multicam feature in particular is that you cannot do live switching, which actually surprised me because, of course, you want to do that because otherwise, if you record like I did on 4 iPhones, you have to go through the entire recording again. Like what we're doing here, Felix behind the scenes is doing multicam editing. We have right now, today, we only have 2 cameras plus an additional angle from my MacBook here. simply because, we don't need the third camera today because it's just me. And we use an ATEM switcher for that. Now, what he does, he constantly cuts between the different angles. Of course you do that. And then we still record all the ISOs, all the stems from each camera. Like you have a clean track from each camera, so he can change all the cuts in post. Live multicam on iPad only records the different streams, and you cannot do live switching yet. Like you cannot do an edit decision list, which is a bit weird to me. I didn't even think about asking about that when we were presented the software in London at their Apple event in March or May, because I thought it's just clear that that it's there, but it's not there. So this is definitely something they have to add, and I think they will, because it's very simple to do. And it will be a huge time saver, of course. Even if you're not a professional filmmaker, if you're a content creator, I think that's what they're targeting. So then you still want to be able to do live switching. That's my biggest caveat. I didn't really dive into all the other functions of Final Cut Pro for iPad in that video yet, because I wanted to focus on this main feature. In general, let me pivot the topic a little bit to the iPad Pro. And now, a little bit of a backstory from my personal point of view. I've been an Apple user all my life. Like I grew up in a family of graphic designers. I bought my first Mac when Apple was almost bankrupt, long before Steve Jobs came back to Apple. I grew up with a graphical user interface when my schoolmates were still working with Windows. What was it, 3.11 or something? It looked like Stone Age to me when I went to school and had to work with these computers, compared to actually working with the Macs at my parents' office. I grew up with that stuff, and I have always been completely invested in that Apple ecosystem. So, I love it, and I feel very comfortable with it. Now, when the iPad came out, which of course I think was a couple of years after the iPhone, it originally was always presented as this magical sheet of glass, right? This magical sheet of glass that can do, is basically your media consumption device, because that's what it was in the beginning. We didn't have the stylus, we didn't have the keyboard, we only had the original iPad. And it was great to watch movies, it was great to maybe check your email and surf the web, but it was not intended as a productivity device. And iOS as a whole wasn't really made to do that. And of course, it's changed a lot over the past, 15 years since the original iPhone came out. But the question is iOS and is iPadOS Pro ready? And that's the whole thing, because the hardware is absolutely amazing. Like, you have never seen, and that's one thing I want to talk about in an additional video. The quality of this screen seriously is the best screen I have ever seen. Like, not from an iPad, like in general. And it's not only me saying that, it's, you listen to people like Linus from Linus Tech Tips, who is definitely not an Apple fan, like not really somebody who's really invested in using Apple products a lot, but they've run tests of this screen and it's just mind-boggling. This is an OLED screen. Apple calls it tandem OLED, so it's basically two OLEDs stacked on top of each other, which has the incredible advantage that it's becoming incredibly bright. Now, I have no idea what this looks like in this, if you're watching the video version of this, but this is an incredible screen. The loaner that Apple sent us is, of course, the top spec version. They want us to test the top spec, I guess. So this is 2 terabyte with a nano texture glass, which is like a laser etched glass that completely reduces glare. Like we have lights all around here, so you don't really see reflections here. The funny thing is the border is still it doesn't have the nano texture, so this is still shiny. And you can see the difference here, I think. So this is really cool to use professionally. It is simply amazing. to watch any kind of video on there, especially HDR quality. It's amazing to watch video in Final Cut Pro for iPad 2. It's very hard to get that across if you don't have it in front of you. So I really recommend you just go check it out, what it looks like, because it is more impressive than you would think. It certainly was for me and everybody, as I've shown it to. Now, that alone means that this is probably a screen you can use professionally as a color grading screen. If you use Sidecar, which is the software that, like the system, part of the system software that Apple uses on macOS in order to be able to use iPads as an additional screen. So I want to test that. I want to test that more because we know that professional production monitors with a high contrast ratio can easily, and HDR monitors especially, can easily cost tens of thousands of dollars and euros. So now the iPad Pro is not a cheap device. It's not inexpensive. But if you see it from that standpoint, it might make sense to invest in that purely as a production or preview monitor in your editing setup, because it's such a good screen and it's so bright. It's much brighter than any OLED because of that tandem, and any normal OLED because of that tandem OLED thing. Now, let's get back to professional workflow. Now, what I mentioned briefly, the thing is, if you're used to macOS, you sometimes have a hard time actually coming to iPadOS and iOS. Now, I completely understand why it is the way it is, because originally it was developed for the iPhone. Now, then they came out with the iPad, and of course, they call it iPadOS now. And there are functions in there which are not available on iPhone. For example, this, what is it called? Stage manager function, and it's a lot of other stuff. But mostly it's the same, right? And you have basically, we've only gotten widgets in one of the last versions. I think it was even iOS 17 or maybe 16. But basically, everybody was kind of waiting for WWDC and hoping for Apple to release a new version of iPadOS that would kind of release it from some of its constraints. And what do I mean by constraints? Well, if you market this as a professional device and you release software that is purely, targeted at professionals, I mean, they showed a lot of different stuff, not only from Apple, but of course you have the Final Cut, you have also Logic from Apple, but you also have something like Procreate, amazing for illustrators to create and draw on this thing. The new Pencil Pro is very, very versatile. And there's a lot of things that you really can only do on iPad. However, you always feel somewhat limited by particularly the file system and how the operating system works. My biggest issue with it right now is the fact that it doesn't allow most background processes. Now, what does that mean? If I open something in Final Cut Pro for iPad 2 and I render, of course you have to render sometimes, you have to export stuff. You literally are stuck. You cannot open another app and do something and have this render in the background. It almost feels like, what was it, macOS 7? Like before Apple actually released macOS 10, which most people listening to this might not even know that it existed or remember. But the original macOS wasn't really good at multitasking. And it kind of locked your computer. Like the first version of Final Cut Pro on the Mac, which was still on the original macOS, after it was completely redeveloped to be macOS 10, it completely blocked everything, like you could not do background rendering, which for a long time was an issue compared to Windows, which was already able to do that. And now with iPadOS, the limitation is similar, but only it's an artificial limitation, because what iOS or iPadOS does, and also iOS on the iPhone does, it kills background processes, and you cannot control which ones are killed. It's just doing it. So there needs to be an ability to keep those processes running in the background, because then you can really be very, very productive with it. Some things just simply take time to render. I mean, this thing is amazingly fast. This is the only device that Apple right now has in the market which has their new M4 chip, which is mind-boggling. So this MacBook is an M2 Max. Of course, there's now the M3, and this is an M4. So this is a better chip. It's more efficient. It takes less power, but it's also faster in all the benchmarks that I've seen. But you're not able to completely leverage it because of the lack of background processes. Usually you have several things running at the same time. Now, same thing, there's Stage Manager, and there's the ability to run different kind of like workspaces at the same time, but like the ability to have several windows open is still very limited. And I think the main issue here is simply that I think Apple needs to put some of the people in their professional workflow group on really rethinking processes on the iPad in order to be able to use it more professionally. Because why do I need, like pages of apps like this? Like imagine having this on your desktop or laptop, basically. Who would put all their apps like this? Of course, you can hide them now, and then you only have them in this app finder thing. But still, I mean, that's the default. The default is that you have all your apps up here. It makes complete sense for, the iPhone, I think, because then you usually, know exactly what you want to do. You either want to, go to Instagram, you want to make a phone call, write a message, open WhatsApp, all those things. You're very intentional about what you're going to do. But with a professional device, I think the mindset is different, because you're actually starting out with a document idea mostly, right? Because if I open take my iPad, and of course, I can watch a movie and then with the same thing, I'll just start Disney Plus or Netflix or whatever. But if I want to use it productively, I now want to edit the photo that I just took on my professional camera, which I can now finally connect via USB-C and load directly from the memory card, which I've done a lot over the last few weeks, like load in even, 50 megapixel files from a Sony A1 and edit them in Lightroom. The thing is, I want to start with a document, right? I want to have a folder here, which has all my files in there, which is just a folder on my desktop, or they call it app screen, but it, essentially it's the same thing. Why can I not have documents here instead of all the apps? I want to have like a work folder, which has all my work stuff in there. I want to have a projects folder, which has my Final Cut projects in there. And then I just start with the project. I don't want to always start with the app. That makes a huge difference. Now, we have the Files app finally. Like over the last couple years, Apple introduced an app which is called Files, which is essentially a repository of files that are exchanged between different apps. Because in the past, those files were really siloed into the different applications, meaning if you would save something inside an app, you would only be able to open it inside that app again. Now it's different. Now you can actually save stuff into the Files app and then open that same file through a different app from within that Files app, but it's treated as an app. It's not treated as Finder like on the Mac, where you can literally just put folders anywhere you want. I think that's what's needed, because that's a very easy change. They could even just make aliases, right? If you have an alias for anything that's inside the Files app and are able to put that on your app screen or desktop, then that will be a completely different story. You will be much easier it's more intuitive. And that combined with background processes and maybe windows, it's very small changes actually, tiny changes, then this could be such a much more productive device. Right now, and you will realize that if you really try to do the whole workflow of something, if you want to, for example, you take a photo on your camera, you want to edit it in Lightroom, you want to go to Photoshop and add some titles, and maybe then you want to animate it in Final Cut. You have to run through like the whole, just a file workflow. is so much more complicated than it would be on a Mac. And I think that's counter-intentional, because the cool thing about an iPad is it's something where it's a very spontaneous device, right? Because you can touch it, you edit stuff directly, either with a stylus or with a pencil or with your finger, which means like you have an idea, you want to do something, you pick it up. It's whether you want to watch a movie now or even edit a photo. It feels much more connected because you're doing it with your hands. Now, to combine that with a more professional way of actually organizing files and interconnecting those different apps, I don't think it takes much of a change, but it takes a change. Like they're giving us tiny little things that make it a little bit more flexible. I mean, now with the upcoming iOS, we are able to finally rearrange the actual files and put them, like the apps actually, put them where we want them, because so far that was not possible. However, it's still not possible to put documents on there. I want to be able to take a folder out of the Files app and put it, outside of the Files app and just have it accessible here. Move it around where I want it. All those things. Very, very simple. We even have a dock here. I mean, that's the same thing as a macOS, right? Why not give us all the ability? I'm not saying this should be macOS. It should not, because macOS is not made for touch. Of course, things need to be rethought and redone, but take the good things from both sides. And I think the people working on iPadOS should think less about the iPhone and think more about the workflows that people who want to use an iPad professionally need. And that would really solve a lot of things. Good. That was a long rant. Not a rant, but it's just a couple thoughts on how to make this better, because I think it's some of the most amazing hardware I've ever touched. Literally, it just feels great, but it's hampered by the operating system. And I'm not the only one to say that. I mean, look at a lot of reviews online. I think most people think the same thing. That's just my thoughts on iPad Pro M4. And again, I will probably do a separate video on that, which is a little bit more scripted and less rambling. But as I'm still working with this. All right. So if you haven't seen it yet, my review, Final Cut Pro for iPad 2, is specifically focusing on the live multicam and the tutorial of how to set it up. And we actually shot this here in the studio. I set up 4 cameras to film myself and then, to record them and do the post-production on that. Editing with a touch screen, I think, is something that LumaFusion has actually done a really good job at. And I think with a new version of Final Cut, Apple is also getting better at that. Because, of course, a lot of processes need to be rethought when you're actually working with your finger instead of the keyboard. Talking about the keyboard, that's my last thing I want to mention. This is really great. The new keyboard that Apple released feels a lot more like an original MacBook keyboard. It's now aluminum. It's not plastic anymore. It's even, it's backlit and everything. It has a bit of there's some issues. For example, if you balance it on your lap, it will easily tip over like that because it's so top heavy with the iPad. But in general, it's very well engineered, and it makes it feel like a more professional device. And again, now we just need the software to complement that. Because I think, maybe Apple is scared that they won't sell as many MacBooks anymore if the iPad becomes too good. But I mean, you have to cannibalize yourself because before somebody else is doing it. That's my opinion here. And I don't really think that's the reason, right? Why why it is limited, but they could be one of them. I think honestly, the iPad, if it's done right, has a bigger potential than MacBooks. I'm serious. I mean, this, if they get the productivity right, maybe they even allow some apps to work on both macOS and iOS. That's something to think about. That would free up a lot of productivity, I think, and it could definitely be something that's the next level of computing, because that's what they're about, right? Apple is all about workflows, is making about I don't think they became so successful because they made the best hardware. They know how to do interfaces. They know how to, they invented the iPhone. They invented the smartphone, and Android, copied it and made a different thing of it more openly. But still, iOS still looks the same as it basically looked like in version 1.0. And it's time to, for the iPad version to move on a little bit faster. Okay, that's my 2 cents on this. Let's move on to the next topic. We did release another review this week, which was a review of an SSD that Johnnie made. The product is called the TEAMGROUP T-Create CinemaPr P31 Portable SSD. Not an easy name to remember, but a very nice device. If you haven't seen that review, of course, SSDs are a little bit less sexy, I would say, than cameras, lenses, iPads, whatever. But they're very important to us. And in the past, we've seen that a lot of people never really cared about the kind of storage they buy because it kind of has to work and it needs to be fast enough. But you only notice it when it's not working or when it's not fast enough or when you lose data. Luckily, in the last few years, I would say there have been more and more manufacturers really focusing more on the professional filmmaker market and introducing products that are specifically targeted at us. Now, this little device, of course, is an external small SSD like so many others. But the cool thing is it comes with, it's very fast, but it comes with mounting holes for your camera, which makes a lot of things much easier. You don't need an extra bracket to mount it to your camera, because there are more and more cameras that allow you to record externally. We tested it with Sigma FP and also the new Panasonic GH7, which Johnnie actually is reviewing today. That's the reason why he's not here. He's reviewing it today in Japan. So watch out for that review over the next few weeks. But so you see that it's very easy to mount that thing to a camera. And here it is on the GH7 as well. Super easy, and a metal aluminum enclosure. It has mounting holes on the side and also at the bottom, and that makes it very, very versatile. There's not much to say about it except for the fact that it works and it's something that's made for filmmakers. So it's available on Amazon, and you can find the link in the review, of course. Just go check that out if you haven't seen if you haven't read or seen that review yet. That's let me get the name right again, TEAMGROUP T-Create CinemaPr P31 Portable SSD. It's available in 4, 2, and 1 terabyte sizes. Let's move on to another small piece of news. Blackmagic Design released the DaVinci Resolve 19 public beta version 4. Now, Blackmagic is always very public about, releasing new versions of their DaVinci software, which of course is incredibly popular. It's free in its basic version, and it's only, I think, $300 if you buy it separately, and it's basically included with most of their cameras and a lot of their other hardware. And we've done a poll a couple months ago and asked people which NLE they are using. And I think DaVinci, well, not that this is representative, but it's maybe representative of our audience. And there were a couple thousand votes, and I think more than 45% actually were using DaVinci as their main NLE now, which is already replacing Premiere also as an editor, not just as a coloring tool, which is amazing. Now, of course, it's very popular, and Blackmagic is very, very busy adding new features. And we have this new DaVinci Resolve 19, which is probably going to be released in its final version in fall. We already have the 4th beta version, and they added one nice new function, which is live sync from cameras. Now, that means that basically using the Blackmagic cloud, you can already get the live sync videos from Blackmagic design cameras. You can get the footage, the proxies, as you're still recording in DaVinci now. Now, this is something that I think was first introduced last September at IBC. We did a video about Blackmagic Cloud, which is being built directly into more and more of their cameras. And also, of course, the Blackmagic Cam app, which is available on iPhone, but now also for Android, which basically means you don't need to, similar to what Apple is doing with the live multicam on Final Cut, but if you use the Blackmagic Cloud, you will also not need timecode sync because they will be synced through the cloud automatically. And in this case, with this new update to DaVinci 19, the Beta 4, H.264 proxies can be synced to a DaVinci Resolve bin while the camera is still recording. So within seconds, you will have the media arriving into your edit as you're still, as the team is still shooting, and you can, the editor can start editing right away, which is kind of amazing. And the files, it also says here the files are synced to Blackmagic Cloud and then forwarded to all Resolve workstations that are connected to the same cloud project. So that's pretty amazing. Now, in general, if you're interested in learning more about DaVinci Resolve, we are offering a lot of resources on that. First of all, we have a good number of quick tips where Alex Hontana, who's our DaVinci expert, is doing short bits on, explaining what is the new DaVinci 19, but also giving quick tips, for example, on what is the difference between the free and the paid version of DaVinci. And you can find those videos embedded in this article. We'll put the link in the show notes. But first and foremost, we also have a very, very, very extensive course on DaVinci Resolve. The beginner's guide to DaVinci Resolve 18.5. Why 18.5? Well, 18.5 or 18.6 is the last version, the final version, which is not beta anymore. We will, of course, update this course to also have DaVinci 19 covered. This is a course on MZed, our educational platform. It's 6 hours long. It goes through everything in DaVinci Resolve. One of the biggest things we've heard from people, despite the fact that it's a free piece of software, people, you have to learn it. It's very complex. Not that it's complicated, but because it can do a lot of different things. And you don't need to do all of them. Like if you only want to edit with it, that's fine. You can only do the editing part. If you only want to do color grading or only want to do visual effects, you can do those things independent of each other because it works in pages. Like there's an edit page, there's a color page, and there's fusion page and so on. So you don't need to do all of that. But if you want to really dive into it and really learn it, I really recommend you checking out this course because Ollie Kensington, who's teaching that course, is an absolute master in DaVinci Resolve. He's actually done 3 other courses for us on DaVinci. We have a separate directing color course. We have other DaVinci courses on the platform. This is the latest course that we have from him. And it's, as I said, 6 hours long and goes into detail. And the cool thing right now is it's currently on sale. Instead of $149, it's only $89.40. But that's literally ending on Friday. So July 5th is the last day. This is our summer sale on MZed. Originally, it was ending on July 4th. We're extending it by just 1 day, and then it's over. And the only next sale you will get is probably Black Friday. So if you want to get this course, if you're interested in learning DaVinci Resolve, now is the best time to get this course, 40% off for less than $90. If you're interested in MZed in general, we currently have this summer sale for everything. So we have a summer sale on our subscription. If you're not only interested in this one course, we have over 57 courses right now with over 750 lessons on all kinds of subjects from some of the best filmmakers in the world. We have an amazing course from Philip Bloom, Filmmaking for Photographers, which goes into a crazy amount of detail about everything. We have an editing course on Premiere, which is super long. I think it's over 20 hours long. We have an editing course on Final Cut Pro and DaVinci, of course, as I said. We have a course on podcasting, which is amazing, from Latasha James. She's a very well-known podcaster, and she goes through all the different tools. So if you want to start your own podcast and really, from the ground up to actually releasing and distributing it, that course goes on everything. One of the coolest courses, one of my favorite courses, is still Directing Motion from Vincent Laforet. Vincent is a Pulitzer Prize winning director, and he made this amazing course. Now, it's not a newest course anymore, but it's still so relevant because it goes through a lot of movie examples and explains with classical movie examples on how to direct and how to make, amazing films and amazing storytelling. One of my favorites. We have the Cinema Sound course, that's mind-boggling. It's over 80 hours long. It's the most extensive course we have. And like everything else, it's also on sale. It's also part of the subscription. So if you pay $199 instead of $349, you get access to all of those courses for 1 year. If you want to own them and keep them forever, you can buy them individually. And this course, usually costs $1,000. It's now $599 because it's like over 80 hours long. And it goes, Mark Lewis goes into the craziest amount of detail on how to acquire professional sound for cinema. And that is both in actually recording it and also the post-production, I already mentioned Philip Bloom's courses. He has a Cinematic Masterclass 2 and filmmaking for photographers. So lots of stuff. So it's definitely, we are very, very happy with MZed and all the feedback and reviews we're getting. There's also a 7-day money-back guarantee. So if you're not sure, you can still check it out. So I really recommend. And again, the sale is ending on July 5th. It says July 4th here, but we've just extended it by 1 day, and it will end on Friday. So be fast when you listen to this if you're interested. And again, the DaVinci course, goes into everything, and will be updated also to cover all the new things in DaVinci 19. Good. Let's move on. Small thing. Pomfort released an update to their Silverstack lab software. Now, what is Silverstack? Professional DITs will know this. This is, one of very few pieces of software that's really targeted at DITs and on-set workflow. This is for watching dailies. This is for doing pre-grades and all those things that are really needed by professional DITs. They just added support for ProRes RAW, which is long overdue, to be honest. But now it's also supported, which of course makes the lives of many easier. With so many cameras that only allow you to record the ProRes RAW externally. So I'm sure that will make a lot of filmmakers happy to finally have that ability to also watch ProRes RAW in Silverstack. They also added support for the new C400 from Canon, which we reported about a couple weeks ago. Very, very highly anticipated camera. We can already see that it's going to be a very popular camera. It's very, affordable, I would say. $8,000 for a camera that can record RAW internally and is definitely rivaling the higher-end Canon cameras, and also the more expensive or equally expensive Sony cameras that cannot record RAW internally. So that's going to be interesting where the C400 actually lands in the market. But it's now supported in Pomfort Silverstack Lab version 8.8. Another small piece of software, company Ignite Digi, an Australian company, I believe, just released a control deck for the DJI transmission. Now, the DJI transmission is also an amazing wireless video transmitter. We know that Teradek is completely dominant in that field, right? Because they have the lowest latency wireless transmitters in the market. A lot of other solutions are using a Wi-Fi based transmission, which has a higher latency. that is because Teradek owns the license. Well, actually, the company behind Teradek, Videndum, owns Amimon, who makes the chip that enables this low latency transmission. I think they've sold Amimon now, but they've kept the technology or something. Anyway, so DJI is really the only other company that makes a wireless video transmitter that is similarly fast in terms of low latency, and it's really, really amazing. I've used it a lot, the DJI transmission with the Ronin 4D, because it's kind of built in. You have this wireless transmitter built in, and you have this separate monitor, a 7-inch monitor, really nice monitor with all the functions you need. And there's also now a wireless fizz unit, and like everything, zoom, focus, iris control. But this company, Ignite Digi, made a more, I would say, traditional controller for people that are used to having more of like a joystick style control, which is really cool, because I think that's something that will allow you to control the Ronin, for example, or also the Inspire drones, so that this is not actually to fly the drones, but to control the camera angle, of course. So for the, like if you fly an Inspire, you usually have the drone pilot and then with their remote, and then you have a separate remote with the person who's actually operating the camera. And this controller is supposed to make the camera control easier for people that are operating the actual visuals on those devices, and not necessarily the device itself. Because also on the Ronin, of course, you will have an operator that's running with it, and you will have somebody else remotely who's operating the camera angle, and that's made for them. It's a highly professional solution. Comes in different packages, I think, and really, really nice to see some movement in that market, and also have third-party accessories that are not made by DJI but work with the DJI products. All right, let's move on. We have a very small device that we thought is worth highlighting. $30 for a Portkeys PD1 switchable double-sided NPF dummy battery. Now, what is that? Well, we've seen double-sided dummy batteries for NPF batteries before, right? Which means like you can mount two devices you can power up to two devices from one dummy battery, which is nice. It just simply saves you on cables and stuff. Like if you run your wireless video transmitter and a monitor, and you have both on your camera, you either run DTAP from a V-mount into them, or very often one of them will be powered by a battery and one will be powered by the DTAP, because you don't have enough DTAP outputs or you don't have regulated voltage. Now this device actually has both, so you can attach two devices which use NPF powering, and power it externally, have regulated voltage, and also turn it. So you can, as you see here, there's only one device attached here, because you literally would not see the adapter if another device was attached here. But in this case, you have this monitor powered by the adapter, and this part you can turn. So you can turn by 90 degrees and then attach something else. You don't have to turn it. You can also keep it upright, but it will make it easier, of course, to sort out the cabling stuff. So I think it's a really cool idea to have that ability. And of course, $30, it's kind of a no-brainer, because that's something you probably want to have in your toolkit if you are on set and have usually several devices on top of your camera. Just adds flexibility and reduces the amount of cabling and things that can go wrong. So that's something we want to point out. Really, really nice piece of hardware. And last but not least, I just want to mention that the FUJIFILM cameras XH2, XH2S, XS20, X106, and XT5 received firmware updates. Very nice to see that Fujifilm is giving those cameras, all of them, a lot of love still, some of which are still new. Some of them are newish, I would say, but they all getting the Reala Ace film simulation. Now, we've talked about this in one of the last episodes with Johnnie, who's really our Fujifilm expert here because he loves shooting with Fujifilm cameras. And he also most recently did the X106 review, which you can see as well. Maybe we can put the link in the show notes. But it's nice to see that more and more of those film simulations that we have in some of those cameras are now also getting rolled out to some of their older cameras. So Fujifilm, as you know, has been known for decades, if not more, a century maybe, for actually creating very nice looking film stock in their film cameras. What they've done is they've one by one recreated their own film stocks to mimic that look in the digital space. And I think they've done a great job. I mean, the Eterna film simulation look was, I think, the first one that got into their cameras. And it's proven to be very, very popular. We've loved using it, I think, on most of our show videos from recent trade shows. They were all shot on Fujifilm cameras using the Eterna film simulation. And now they're just adding more of them. And there's this Reala Ace, which is now also part of a lot of the existing cameras. And other than that, of course, there's bug fixes and stuff like that that always comes in with firmware updates. And it basically, Fujifilm is a lot about color, like really getting nice color out of their cameras. And I just love the amount of attention they give to this because, yes, we can all shoot in log, but the reality is very often in the, times like these, we all produce so much content. It's sometimes simply not feasible to do color grading on everything we shoot. And rather than, either handing that control over to somebody else who you as a shooter might not be in control anymore, what they do, it's of course nice to get a nice look already in camera if possible. All right, I think we'll wrap it up here. I have to stop my monologue here. How long was this, Felix? 47 minutes. So it's longer than Johnnie last week. So anyway, I managed to ramble for almost an hour. Thanks everybody for listening. We'll see you next week. And yeah, thank you. Have a great week.